world is changing fast. New technologies are impacting how we think about products, services, and the way we live our lives. Nowhere is this trend more present than in financial services, where new business models and customer expectations are changing our conceptions about banking, finance, and the very nature of money. Welcome to Rebank, a visionary podcast about banking, FinTech, and the future. The future of banking is here.
Hello and welcome to Rebank. I'm your host, Will Beeson. Today we're thrilled to be joined by Sam Maule. Sam is Managing Director North America for 11FS, a UK-based digital consulting firm. Prior to joining 11FS, Sam led Digital and Fintech for NTT Data, and before that, he worked on product at TSYS, a card processor. Sam is the host of the Connection Interrupted podcast, where he interviews guests about their experiences with technology. As always, connect with us on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, or on our website at bankingthefuture.com. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe on iTunes or your podcast platform of choice and leave us a review. Thank you very much for joining us today. Please welcome Sam Maule. Sam, welcome to Rebank.
Thanks, Will, man. This has got to be fun.
Yeah, finally. I feel like we're overdue for this.
It was bound to happen at some point, right?
So you're a big deal in FinTech across a number of different advisory and operational positions, from hosting podcasts to digital transformation. How would you describe your day job?
Definitely not as a big deal in FinTech whatsoever. As I got a lot of kids. My 15-year-old daughter's the funniest, because every now and then I'll get excited because I get to interview somebody, who's kind of a big deal, or, the interview gets great hits, and I'll be talking to my wife about it or something like that, and I'll look at her and she goes, "Dad, you are popular with such a small group of nerds. It doesn't matter." So, there's your humbling experience.
How many is a lot of kids?
I got 4 kids. I have three daughters, a son, and then a 4-year-old granddaughter. So I've got everything.
Wow, nice.
So my days are full. It's fun. I think I just got lucky. FinTech really just took off right as I was discovering social, and I kind of realized that this was a medium that was going to take off. I was actually living in England at the time. I was working for TSYS. I was based out of York, and I moved there in 2006. So right when the iPhone came out is when I moved over to the UK. And with the iPhone, with the 2008 election, Twitter really started taking off. LinkedIn was taking off. I actually remember my first LinkedIn invite was from a client of mine from Royal Bank of Scotland. And I thought, what the hell is this? What is this thing? But I kind of saw the value in it, and started getting active on Twitter. And back then Twitter was a lot of fun. You could really have deep conversations with folks, and I really enjoyed it. And I'm late to Facebook, though. I actually didn't get on Facebook until last year, and was kind of forced on Facebook. Because when you do a lot of speaking and you do a lot of podcasts, like you do, you have to have a Facebook presence. I mean, you just do. But I had avoided it because I just figured that was one more fire hose that I'd have to put up with. But I've actually enjoyed it, which is odd. Facebook's been kind of fun. So I just think timing is usual as everything, right? Just fell into the right place at the right time, and used it the right way. I mean, you know this. When you're dealing with social channels, the whole idea is engagement. It's just not listening. It's being an active participant and setting aside the time to do it. And if you do that, odds are you're going to have some nice success. So it's been good for me.
Yeah, I mean, there's been so much kind of chatter recently about social media, and is it good or is it bad, or is it doing the right stuff or not? I mean, at the end of the day, it's like a distillation in many ways of human nature, right? And like all of this stuff is true online or offline. It's just kind of the way that we engage with it.
It's human evolution, right? I mean, we love to tell stories. We used to do it around a campfire in a cave. And storytellers have always had a successful role in society. I don't care what part of the world, whether it's the Far East or here in the West, storytelling's always been part of our DNA. And those that are good at it will tend to do well. And so, social amplifies that. It's easy to get frustrated with how social has evolved, and to some degree, I've gotten frustrated with it. Right? I think early on we were very excited with this medium as a tool for good, and at the end of the day, it is just a tool. Right? It doesn't matter what side of the argument you're on. You can use it to your advantage. I like what Gary Vaynerchuk said about Facebook. I think that was a good example. He was asked one time, about all the fake news and what was happening with Facebook, and he said, "Look, Facebook is just a mirror. It reveals who you really are," and I agree with that. I would say the same with Twitter. I would say the same with everything. Is fake news and fake stories an issue? Yes. But I throw a lot of onus back on the individual. It takes literally 5 minutes to discount a story. There's something called Google that's fantastic. You can go out and Google and look for sources that are great, right? Whether it be the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, BBC. There are so many different news sources that you can get multiple reference on any story and easily discount something. But the sad thing is most people are lazy. That's the blunt truth. And we want to hear what we want to hear, and we embrace that. So I don't know that I have an issue as much with social channels as I do with individuals. That's a harsh statement, but I don't care. It's true.
Well, it's interesting to think about that's obviously one area of technology and what the way technology is impacting society. You run a podcast called Connection Interrupted, which is about people's experiences with technology, and it's interesting people with interesting stories. Tell us a bit about that podcast and where the idea came from, and maybe some of the early episodes that have been particularly interesting.
Yeah, it's a natural evolution of what I've been doing. I really got. I fell in love with podcasting. To me, it's just a ton of fun. I'm a naturally curious person. I like people, and I like their stories. And so, I had the chance to do a short-form interview series called FinTech 5. It's still out there. Jason Hendricks is doing that and is part of Rebank Media with Brett King and his team. And I love that format, right? Short-form interviews with people in FinTech. It was challenging, though, right? Because I was trying to limit that interview to about 5 to 10 minutes. And so when I joined 11FS, and they've got, oh my Lord, we've got, I don't know how many podcasts now. I think we're generating content every day. But it was funny when I pitched to the team there to say, hey, I like the interview series. I want to keep doing it. And the team, David Breyer, Jason Bates, and Simon, pretty much gave me the freedom to work with the media team and do whatever I wanted. And I do remember sitting with them and said, good, I want to do something that's not based on fintech. And they're like, oh my God, dude, we hired you to help, build up our presence in the U.S. And I said, yeah, I get that 100%. But to me, it's more than just fintech, right? Technology touches every aspect of our life. It gives you the ability to do this podcast, gives you the ability to interview people all over the world and get their background stories. And technology has literally just become part of our lives. You look at my kids, right? I mean, they're a great example. Their entire life, my son is 13 years old. Smartphones have been around since, he was, I think he was 4 months old when we moved to the UK. They've always been around. He's never had a point in his life where it hasn't been there. Every single one of my kids, grown up with the internet. I had to learn all these tools. I can remember when I sent my first email. I can remember the first time I logged on to the web. I can remember the first time I used a smartphone. I remember the first time I used an iPad. I remember the first time I actually used a real laptop. My kids, it's been there since day one. And so if we have a medium like that, if we have something that's part of us, we're literally all just cyborgs now. and it's only going to continue to get more pervasive. Finding those stories of how people are interacting and how they're using it for good, that's really the part that I want to focus on Connection Interrupted. How are people using technology to impact other people's lives and make the world a better place?
So where should people start with Connection Interrupted? Which episode?
Oh, that's a good question. I'd start with episode 1, John Hope Bryant. I love that interview. John Hope Bryant is easily, to me, one of the most inspiring people I know personally. He was American Banker's Innovator of the Year, I think 2 years ago, if I remember right, which is funny because he's not a banker. He's on an organization called Operation Hope, where he works with folks with very poor credit scores and works to teach them financial wellness and to pull themselves, if you will, out of poverty and to increase their credit scores. I like what he says, you never see riots in an area with a credit score above 700. And to me, that's an interesting turn of phrase. But, this guy's brilliant. He's worked as an advisor to President Bush Sr., President Bush Jr., Clinton, Obama. He's got an incredibly successful story. His mentor is Ambassador Andrew Young, the Andrew Young that worked with Dr. Martin Luther King. He's been on Oprah. He's great friends with Chelsea Clinton. I mean, this guy, I tried to get him to run for office, and he won't do it. I really tried in the interview to get him to run for office, and his response, I think, was fascinating. He's a true capitalist. He definitely believes in the capitalist system, but he's also somebody who believes in doing good, and it's a great blend. I found him to be fascinating, and if you want to start, to me, that's one of the best. I've really enjoyed that interview.
All right, so apart from the podcast, what do you do on a daily basis?
I try to get a nap every day now. That's true. You know what, Will? That is
exercise, eat healthy.
Yeah. No, I try to get a 20-minute kip in every day because I'm 51 now, and I have fallen in love with naps. A massive believer that sleep is important. I'm an insomniac, so trust me. What do? I joined 11FS in August of 2017. And that's actually a funny story because I knew the founders really from the day they started the company. David Breyer, who led digital banking at Gartner, Simon Taylor, who led blockchain for Barclays, and Jason Bates, who actually started two of these challenger banks in the UK, Monzo and Starling. I knew when they were putting the company together, I knew what they were doing. I thought it was interesting, but at the time I was going to turn 50 years old and I had no desire to do a startup. I loved working with startups, but at the time I was working for NTT Data. I was heading up their Digital and Fintech practice for financial services and insurance. I had a great job. I was working for a great company, a big global company. And while startups are fascinating to me, I just, wasn't ready to take that risk. But then over about a year period of time, I kept watching these guys and the success they had with the company and how fast it was growing, the clients they were bringing on. And I went and spent some time with them in Copenhagen at Money 2020 Europe last year and got to watch them, firsthand. The crew they had, the quality of the production they were doing on their interviews, the interaction they were having with industry leaders, and talk to them about every night. And I got to be honest, the decision for me was really easy to jump. Then I had to convince my family. That was a lot harder. I had to convince my wife that in my mid-50s it was time to take a risk and work with a challenger startup company, Challenger Consultancy Group. And best decision I ever made. I've had a blast. So I am the managing partner for North America for 11FS. So, I was tasked with really for 2017 focusing on the U.S. market awareness of who 11FS was. And now for 2018, it's all about, project revenue and bringing on these U.S. Clients, which we are doing, and we're doing it at scale. And it's going to be a lot of fun to replicate the success they've had in Europe over here.
So give us an example of a type of project that you guys would do for a U.S. client.
Yeah, no problem. 11FS, here's the funny part. We have operated in stealth mode for so long, and I've loved it. All anybody thinks we do is that we're a media company. So we have 4 key areas of our company. The first is around media. So we do have our own media group. Literally everything we produce, every podcast, every video, every graphic you see is by our team. So we do have multiple podcasts. We have FinTech Insider, Blockchain Insider, InsurTech Insider, Connection Interrupted. We do live events. We had our largest FinTech Insider live event in London yesterday. I think we had 300 folks show up for that. That's become a monthly kind of go-to festival, it feels like, in London. We're going to replicate that here in the U.S., which I can't wait to do. Those are live shows, where we have guests on. There's obviously beer and alcohol as part of that. From the pictures I saw, a lot of damn photo booths also, which is a lot of fun. The podcasts, are all sponsored. That entire business unit is a revenue-producing line of business for us, and we also work with quite a few clients on producing content for them. We then have a market research side of our business. So again, there's 4 parts to our business. So the second part is around market research. That's led by Ross at 11FS. We have a product called Pulse, which to me is easily the best product research tool out there. And you got to remember, I was a product manager, so I spent quite a bit of time at TSYS, the card processor, on their consumer and commercial web products, and managing your accounts online. So I've had to do product development. And the typical way you do product development is, let's say you want to add online bill pay, for example, back in the day. You look around your team and say, how many of you use online bill pay with one of your banks? Can you go out and take some screenshots for us? Right? Go out, log in, do some screenshots, do some screen grabs so we can kind of understand the flow. And what Pulse does is we actually have a user network all across the globe where we use authenticated users that log in, and we record real live sessions, whether on the phone or whether on a desktop, of those journeys. And we have a searchable database at a use case level. So if I only want to see onboarding, or if I only want to see bill payment, or if I only want to see, check my balance, or a chat bot, I can see that use case. So the typical journey is about 2 to 3 minutes long, and we have over 1,100 hours worth of journeys from companies ranging from Alipay in China to the largest banks in the world to, Betterment, Wealthfront, and other fintech companies here in the U.S., Nubank in South America, just everywhere. And so that's a subscription-based service that we have that has done incredibly well. A lot of banks, a lot of fintech companies as clients. And on the back of that, then we do market research that leads to projects to say, all right, show us the best digital experience journeys in the world in this specific category. And so like reports that you'd get from Forrester or from McKinsey or BCG and others, that would be the competition. And, that's the type of information we provide. Then we do your standard consultancy work. That would be our third our vertical, our third pillar, what you would expect. A lot of work in payments, a lot of work in blockchain, a lot of work in digital. And then last but not least is building banks. We actually have clients that work with us for us to build them the pure play digital experience, the pure play digital bank. And you got to remember, with Jason Bates, who helped co-found Monzo and Starling. David led digital banking at Gartner's. We've got a little bit of experience in that space. So that's a fun one because you're acting as a startup, but you don't have to go out and try to get seed capital and raise funding for this because it's coming directly from your client. And that's a unique product and one I've loved doing. And we're doing that really at scale on, at this point, 3 different continents.
Wow. All right. Lots going on.
Yeah, a little busy, just to be blunt.
So we don't cover U.S. fintech nearly as much as we'd like to. So it's great to catch up with you and dig into it a little bit. So one of the series that you do for the FinTech Insider podcast you guys run is the State of the Union series. Yeah. So if I put the question to you then, what's the state of the union in U.S. fintech?
Yeah, definitely evolving and becoming more mature. I think we're well past the ideology that fintech was going to replace all the banks. If you take a look, it was 2018, right? So we're 10 years on from the crash that happened. We're 9 years since Occupy Wall Street. If you take a look at any of the top tier banks, they're all doing great. Even Wells Fargo, for all the crap that has been thrown their way. At the end of the day, Wells has done all right. Record revenue for just about every large-scale bank. The credit union space has done well. I think, if anything, the mid-tier banks, the community banks, have struggled a little bit over the past 10 years. But I think with where we're at with the regulatory environment since President Trump won the election, that there's obviously still a lot of unknowns of what's going to happen. But I think we all know that the regulatory environment is continuing to loosen up. We had the tax overhaul that took place. I was actually with a bank when that happened and watched their board members high-five each other. That was one of the weirdest experiences of my life, is witnessing that. Watching a group that was pretty happy. And I think the concept of banks working with fintech companies is the norm now. I mean, they've become a provider. I almost don't even like the term fintech anymore, to be blunt. It's overused, it's overhyped. There are just a ton of service providers for banks that are out there, and that's, to me, is the norm now.
Yeah. Does the space seem more or less active to you in the U.S. than maybe in the UK or other parts of the world?
I still think it's incredibly active, right? And what I like is it's expanded. It used to be just New York and Silicon Valley. So you had Silicon Valley and Silicon Alley, and that was really where it was focused. But, you can go to Austin now, and it's got an incredible scene. Dallas has a massive fintech community. Atlanta is growing like crazy. Charlotte's starting to make their presence known. So, you got Silicon Prairie. I know so many great companies in Iowa, for example, that are up and running in Chicago. Detroit's got a tech scene that's really starting to take off. So what I'm most encouraged by is that geography disbursement that we're seeing take place, and the realization that you just don't have to be in New York and San Francisco.
A lot of the success stories early on were around lending. The likes of Cabbage, you mentioned, Lending Club, Prosper, SoFi, and also robo-advisory. We connected with John Stein from Betterment a couple weeks ago, Wealthfront, but it feels like certainly the fintech universe is much broader than that. Is there more interesting activity in the U.S. than those two kind of traditional, if you will, fintech verticals?
Yeah, lending was obviously the big one, and then payments, right, was huge, and then robo-advisory about a year or two ago, kind of hit the scene, and everybody fell in love with it. Obviously, RegTech is an interesting one that's continuing to grow. I think insurance is really starting to boom. People have looked at the space and said, "Oh my God, you sit on a mountain of data and you do jack all with it." So there's all kind of opportunities there. One that I love seeing take off now is a focus back on the commercial side. So small business is really, I think, starting to grow. Small business solutions, which have been really ignored. It is interesting that fintech focused in really on the consumer-facing side. And, well, I know you do this all the time. You've done the equivalent of the Shark Tank or the Dragon Dead, pitches, to where people come up and pitch ideas at you, and you have to judge them. And, one of my first questions always is, what's the model? Is this B2C or B2B? And every time it's direct to consumer, in my mind, I'm already giving it a negative check mark, because that's the hardest thing in the world to crack. It just is. The B2B model, that's be working on those god-awful, ugly processes that we have sitting there, and improving them. And you can do that at scale. That's one I personally love. And that's one where I'm seeing more and more focus starting to take place. And I'm highly encouraged by that.
So right now, in terms of some of that infrastructure piece, there's a task force right now that's looking at developing a faster payments network in the U.S., similar to what a number of countries in other parts of the world have. Any kind of update in terms of thought process, progress on that front?
Yeah. When you talk about the U.S., right, and we can sit here, we can talk about NACHA and how we do payments here, it did make me laugh, right? Faster payments as compared to overseas, whether it be in the UK or you look what they have in Australia or in Asia as compared to what we have here in the US. At one point, our idea of faster payments was instead of having one batch process a day, to have 3. If the word batch is in there, you should just be slapped. Straight up. That is not faster payments. It's a batch file.
Well, I suppose faster.
Yeah, doing more. It's like, oh God, stop it. What I find interesting overall about the U.S. market, and this is across tech. This isn't just fintech. Is what I have typically seen is we'll see it move east to west, and what I mean by that is we'll see something really start to take off in the Far East, and right now that would be China, which is a fascinating market to follow, but used to be Japan. But we'll watch Asia, and technology will start to take a foothold there. It will morph as it moves its way across the globe and start to get into Eastern Europe, and then Western Europe, and then the UK, and then finally the US. It's never, by the time it gets here, it's never what it was over there, right? And it can't be. To try to replicate products is just foolish. And I've given that in many talks before. A good example of that is M-Pesa, right? Incredible successful in several countries in Africa. Not in the whole of Africa. I think it failed miserably, if I remember right, in South Africa, for example. They tried to roll it out in Romania, and it didn't work. Because, shockingly, the regulatory environment, the banking structure, the consumers are different there. So if you just try to lift a product, if you try to do Alibaba, right, and Ant Financial here in the U.S., good luck. How banks, how the government, and how those companies interact in China is not how it works here in the U.S. So, outside of Amazon, good luck with that. So I have found that transition, right, and watching these products work their way around to be interesting. So when it comes to faster payments, do I think we'll do something here? Yeah, I really do. I don't think we'll completely replicate the UK model when we do that. But thank God we will do something. It's just a hell of a lot harder here in the U.S. because we're such a diverse. There's so many damn different systems, right?
Yeah.
Yes. Good luck here.
There's all this back and forth around some sort of like FinTech Charter, and it kind of seems to go in vogue and then out of vogue, and then a group of states will get together and decide they're going to do something on their own. I mean, what's the deal with that?
I think anytime you struggle with the charter, right? The OCC, worked under the Obama administration, for example. I know they pulled in folks like Chris Skinner, Brett King, and others to come and talk to them and to help try to put out guidelines. Remember when the OCC published that? Nothing really came of that, in my opinion. It was watered down with what they published, but at least it was a step in the right direction. I think my issue or the challenge is when it comes to a regulatory environment and when it comes to oversight like that, I don't care if it's at the state level or the federal level, they're almost always a decade behind, right? I mean, look at the whole argument over net neutrality and what we went through here in the U.S., right? To expect, in many cases, a politician or a government official to understand technology at the depth that the startup companies and the established Big Five have, they're easily a decade behind. We're still putting in landline regulatory guidelines and compliance levels when we live in a digital age, and I think that's normal. And so that's a challenge you're always going to have to live with. So you have a huge onus on you to continue to work to try to educate the regulators. That just has to be part of really any startup or any tech company's life, is to know that they're going to have to work with and educate governments and regulators constantly. Because it's also, you and I both know this, right? I mean, this field moves so fast, literally moves so fast, and the technology that gets introduced changes so quickly, and yet some things don't. So I'll give you an example of that, right? You've been to Money 2020, right? You've watched how it's evolved. remember the digital wallet wars early on, and all the talk we had there, and how we were convinced that NFC was going to be everything here in the U.S. And we got all caught up in tokenization and everything else. And yet the most successful wallets here in the U.S. still are using damn barcodes and using QR codes. What the hell? But I mean, that's reality. That's where we're at.
Yeah.
So,
But it's interesting and maybe not surprising in that context that a lot of the, if we can still think of it as fintech, does that term actually mean anything? Probably not. Who cares? But it's everything that's going on in the crypto space, and it's blockchain, and it's everything that's unregulated, because it seems like the biggest roadblock to fintech becoming as core a thing in the U.S. as is in other parts of the world is the regulatory environment. So if you need a small number of regulators to get together to approve anything when it comes to changes in the way that banking charters are given, whether or not you need a physical branch in order to get a charter, and therefore whether a digital only bank is even possible. Well, if they can't sort that out, then maybe it's easier to innovate in wholly new unregulated spaces like crypto and blockchain.
Yeah, and we've seen that before, right? We've seen, and you can get even outside of crypto. We talk about emerging markets and how they actually have an advantage to leapfrog established markets like what you have in Europe and the U.S. So Africa being a great example of that, right, as an entire continent. The success of M-Pesa itself was based upon the non-existence of a legacy infrastructure, right, where they could jump right into minutes and mobile to create banking solutions for individuals, because they could just leapfrog us when it comes to that, because again, they didn't have to drag the entire, to use a military analogy for this, you didn't have that entire massive fleet of ships, which are all interwoven together, and the logistics and support there, they didn't have to drag that behind them to make it work. So the ability to leapfrog. So crypto is a very good example of that, right? And yet I laugh all the time at some of the things that I see happen in the crypto space. So, I mean, I'm engaged, right? I mean, I own, a small amount, and I play. But I remember one of the first times I went to set up, and I'm not going to name the provider. I won't name and shame, even though, God, I want to. But I wanted to buy some Ether, for example, and I went through the onboarding process through one of these providers, and provided a copy of my driver's license, and I literally got a message back to me that said, "Thank you, you've completed the onboarding process. We will contact you in 2 to 3 weeks because our KYC process is, we received so much volume." So literally, they were doing KYC manually. So this is supposed to be the new technology, right? The new way of doing work, and yet they can't integrate with a Trulio or an Alloy or a Take Your Pick to do real-time KYC. Guys, call me. I will help you out.
Well, given that 99% of Americans buy crypto through the same very well VC-funded company, we can probably guess who it is.
Yeah, and I might just have an account there. But as if you remember that Pulse product, one of the things we do is we try to look at the entire market and record that experience. So I just might have that experience recorded, and you can literally hear me cuss when that message comes up, because I go, "What the?" And we'll let the users imagine where I went after that.
So how much of the Ethereum upswing did you miss as a result of that delay?
Well, luckily, I was able to buy it on a different platform that maybe others have. So I did well. But that entire experience, and it continues to be that way. My pastor has asked me about buying Bitcoin. I have a driver in my neighborhood that takes me back and forth to the airport because I'm lazy. Has asked me about investing in crypto. When that happens, we're in a little bit of a bubble. And at the time we were. So, it's a fun space. And it's one I'm fascinated by. But you raised a good point about the regulatory side with crypto. And I can tell you Simon Taylor with our company is doing some very interesting stuff in that space. I would say watch this space.
Yeah. You, I think, started your career in working for banks and then moved into
software suppliers to banks, and now you're a consultant. How has that kind of journey looked, and is it different, kind of working with banks from the outside versus from the inside?
Yeah, my career path, if you ever want to have some fun, go to LinkedIn and look at all the different places I've worked. It's interesting because I typically do about 10 years at a company. I'm not somebody who jumps around a lot. I started, I had a 10-year career in the Navy, working on submarines, which kind of got me introduced to computers and technology. Got out, went to work for Northern Trust, so a global whitebird bank, and working in wealth management. And it's at that point that I discovered coding and being a developer and program project management. So that typical path. So I've worked at a global bank in wealth management. Went to work for TSYS for I think about 8 years, if I remember right. So I've been on that provider side and been a product manager. And then I went to consulting, and where I've stayed since then. I would say my observations going back to the 90s till now is I really haven't seen a massive amount of movement in culture or change within the big banks. I've seen folks try, and in small areas and groups it has worked. But, well, you know this. Pick a bank and just throw a dart at a list of names, and I can tell you they're probably doing 4 releases a year. 2 of them are around regulatory pushes. People want to talk about what's coming in for 2018, or at the end of every year, it's always, what do we think is next? What's coming for 2018, 2019? I'm like, they already know. The roadmap has been locked down, for 2 years now. Good luck trying to get something fitted in. About the only thing they have openings for are for compliance code that they have to push. I think Jeff Bezos said that from stage. He was asked about that, the Amazon roadmap. And he's like, folks, ours is locked down for the next, year or two. And that's reality. He goes, I'm not thinking about this quarter. This quarter was done, 2 years ago as we were putting the roadmap together. And so banks are still definitely in that mode, the majority of them, where it's quarterly releases, it's a freeze around Christmas, It's in some cases it's reliance upon First Data or TSYS, or a Jack Henry or an FIS or Fiserv, and they're trying to service multiple clients, right, and keep everybody happy, and good luck doing that.
So how do you as a consultant make an impact? You then show up and you're like, all right, we need to do this differently, but they've been doing it that way for decades.
Yeah, and that's the whole theme of 11FS, right? Is that you've been doing the same thing the same way for so many years, and if I'm not mistaken, that's the definition of insanity, when you do the same thing the same way time and time again and expect different results. So
and how do potential customers respond when you tell them that?
Yeah, exactly. They just love that message, right? The good news is it either clicks or it doesn't, because what we say is, look, why don't you actually think like a startup and act like a startup and work with us, and we can show you how to do that. Instead of going in and making these massive investments. I believe we had one client that was talking to us, and they said, they had one of the top consultancy groups come into them to talk to them about building a pure play digital bank, and they quoted them, I believe, 250 million pounds. And David Breyer was in the room when they said that, and David looked at him and said, I'll take 1/10 of that right now. And I'll build you something and deploy it. Because you and I both know startups aren't running in, with 250 million pounds in that, even in a Series A or B, right? That's just ridiculous money. And yet, the ones that are making impacts are doing it, right? They're developing to some degree on a shoestring and in a very rapid pace. But the reality is, in order to do that, you have to do it outside the banking infrastructure. That's where it gets challenging. Yeah. So in order to make it work, that's what you got to do.
Yeah. We talked briefly about the tax bill that was recently passed by the U.S. government and some of the kind of challenge / rethinking of some of the legislation that was enacted post 2008. What is the current U.S. political climate mean for banking and fintech?
Well, I'd like to say that banks are going to invest in innovation and in products, and I think the big banks already have, right? I mean that's the reality. If I'm a top 10 bank, it's not like I've ignored innovation. I think I get so tired of hearing that they haven't. They have. You look at how well Bank of America has addressed mobile banking, right? You go back several years, and they were getting crucified for just how lousy their digital products are. And now they're seeing, their numbers are ridiculous on people, adopting and using their technology. You want to see real numbers, just ping Ron Shevlin, and Ron will be happy to tell you how well the banks are doing when it comes to that and not losing customers. I think the challenge gets a little bit more interesting when you're not in that top 10. When you start getting into your super regionals and your larger regional banks, and how do they compete, and how do they draw market share? Because the reality is the U.S., especially the U.S., when it comes to banking, when it comes to credit cards, this is one played out region. And it just is. The market has been saturated for years, and to get any type of movement is incredibly hard to do. It really is, to differentiate yourself. Just think over the past, 3-4 years. Can you name a product that's impacted the market that, for example, a bank has introduced that's really made a major impact? I can think of one off the top of my head. Chase Sapphire. Good on them. They did a good job with that. Can you name another? Capital One, their travel card, right? And that was, I think, some really great marketing and simplicity around the product, but I'll struggle after that. You mentioned robo-advisors early on, Will. The reality is, if you go out to Fidelity and look at their assets under management, they're doing fine. And they, introduced their own product. And what the major banks did is they started partnering with some of these robo-advisors. But robo-advisor is such a small chunk of wealth management in the large scheme of things. It is a tiny chunk in reality. And the big players can afford to not have to be first in. They can watch this, they can pivot, and they can develop products themselves. And they've done a good job of it. So it's challenging. I think the changes in the tax structure, and what I hope is that money just doesn't get put back and focused on shareholders.
Yeah, that's interesting because based on your description, the U.S. doesn't sound like the most fertile ground for a lot of financial services-related startup innovation at the edges, surely. But, what about financial inclusion? Like, are all segments of the wealth hierarchy equally well served by the existing structure?
Yeah, now don't get me wrong. If I didn't think that the U.S. was a market to go after, I never would have took this job.
Well, but working with incumbent banks and helping
focus,
them
right?
improve is a bit different than starting a fintech, a new tech company from scratch addressing financial services.
Yeah, I think there's opportunity here, right? Definitely opportunity to improve the services that the banks provide. I think there's a definite opportunity for companies to come in and focus in on this. I've used this quote a few times before, and I'll say it again. Mike Dudas. Mike used to be with Braintree. He worked at Google Wallet. He worked at Button, and now he's a VC focused in on cryptocurrencies. Mike told me one time, I asked him for his advice. If you were to do a startup, how would you approach it here in the U.S.? And he said, think narrow, think deep. Really think a single use case if you can, but one that has, impacts almost everybody. And really narrowly focus in on that and make it the best there is. Now, the problem is it's incredibly hard for a bank to do because they have their hands in everything, right? That's just reality. You have so many different verticals. You have so many different product lines. So you pick a single use case and you're like, oh, hell, because it impacts all across that spaghetti wire functions that you have for that legacy system. But when you're coming in fresh, it's a different story, right? When you're coming in 100% new, and if you build this right and you're able to bolt on the right APIs for this, it gets fascinating on what you can do. So yeah, financial inclusion is a great example of that. I think some of the challenges, for example, around financial inclusion, you got to get back to, it's got to make money, right? The revenue model for that, what you're going to do to be able to support that. That can make it a touch more challenging. But I hope it works. I want it to work.
Based on your Facebook activity, you're one of the most active travelers I know. What keeps you on the road?
I like to travel. You know what?
This is all leisure then, is it?
This is the truth. This is my parents' fault. It's a Freudian thing. No,
A sailor, right?
Yeah. Well, the reality is, I grew up poor, man. I grew up in the inner city, well, close to the inner city of Detroit. I had a mother who had multiple sclerosis, so this is the 70s. They didn't know what MS was. We went $500,000 in debt due to medical bills. My dad was an iron worker, so we did not have money growing up. And I desperately wanted to see the world. That's why I joined the Navy. By the way, I saw nothing. If you want to see the world, don't go on a submarine. I saw the inside of a metal wall. For, 90 days at a shot. So I've always had a travel bug, and I love to read, and I love to read about other places. So when I get opportunities to go and speak and travel, I love doing it. It's built into me, and I'm lucky enough that I'm able to do that, right? That I'm asked to come and speak and talk about my experiences. And then with 11FS, I get that opportunity too.
Yeah.
So, but you have to balance that, right? There's that work-life balance, because I do have a family, so I try to limit these to, short sprints. Get out there, do it, get like a day to see the environment, and then get it back on a plane and get back home. So,
on that note, where can people look for you over the next few months? I understand you've got a few things coming up.
Yeah, I got a few things coming up. End of the month, I will be in New York, I think on the 27th, doing a big event with Capgemini and LinkedIn. Funny enough, then 2 days later, one day later, on the 28th, I'll be in Luxembourg with their innovation group called The Loft, which is actually sponsored by the Luxembourg government. Will, that is cool, because you're talking to, I don't know, this is sad because I don't remember the president of Luxembourg, the prime minister, whatever it is, I can't remember. But it's a wonderful setting. It's a great event that Matteo Rizzi does. So I'll be in Luxembourg giving a keynote there. And then I'll be in London after that doing some work and going to watch my beloved Arsenal play Man City. I'll probably be incredibly disappointed with that result. I'll be in Seattle in early March speaking. I'll be in Austin with American bankers speaking with them. It's that time of year. March and April's just nuts. So if there's a FinTech event, odds are you'll see this short little guy with glasses. That'll be me.
All right, perfect. Well, people know where to catch up with you then. Sam, what's the best way, apart from those events, for people to connect with you?
Twitter, I think, is a great place. You can reach out to, follow me at Sam Maule is a wonderful way to do it. Reach out to 11FS, go to our website. Easy way to contact us and to follow us and see what we're doing. And really, listen to the podcast.
Great.
Same way with you, Will, right? To find out what's going on is to subscribe to the podcast, and I would say the same thing.
Yep. Good stuff. Sam Maule, thank you very much for joining us today.
That's been fun, man. Thanks.
Thanks for tuning into Rebank. If you like today's show, reach out. Follow us on Twitter at Rebank Podcast and join the conversation. For more on banking, fintech, and the future, check out our regular content at www.bankingthefuture.com.